Good morning and welcome back to everyone joining us online and in the room for Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. I'm Joanna Roberts, I'm Politico's Senior EU Policy Editor, and I wanted to chat a little bit about money. In 2024, Mario Draghi drafted his plan to revive the EU economy and maintain its competitive edge on the global stage, but that came with a price tag, 800 billion euros per year of private and public investment, an amount he called unprecedented. Nearly 2 years on, how close are we to that vision of Europe, in particular when it comes to the investment we need to turn things around? To discuss this today, I'm joined by two of our journalists, Politico's senior finance correspondent, Bianca Smith-Mayer, and our financial services reporter, Gregorio Sorgi. Greg, you're also covering the EU budget for us, so let's start with that. The sort of multi-annual financial framework of the EU's long-term budget was currently 1.2 trillion. We had a proposal last summer to bring that up to 1.8. Talk to us a little bit about that. It doesn't quite seem enough from a Draghi point of view.
Yeah, well, one of the key points Draghi made in his report was that the EU budget as it currently stands is too small, and he proposed to increase it significantly. Did this happen? Not really, because the budget has increased by a very tiny amount. Currently, it's 1.26. The proposal for the next 7 years is 1.26%. Percent of EU GNI in the last 7 years. So the current budget is 1.12. So it's a very, very tiny increase. And the Commission has said that essentially it will get better value for money because it's linking the payments to economic reforms that countries will have to make. But I think that it's fair to say that when it comes to the size, the Commission hasn't really delivered on Draghi's recommendations. And it's not only their fault, it depends ultimately on the fact that most member states don't want a bigger budget because they don't want to increase their payments to the EU's budget. I think where the Commission has delivered more is on the structures and on the reforms to the EU budget that Draghi has recommended, and those have been met to a significant extent.
So we're talking about this European Competitiveness Fund that's sort of within their budget. Explain a little bit about how that works.
The supporters of the budget reform called the Competitiveness Fund the Draghi Fund because it's modeled on Draghi's report, and to be fair, it was already in the ether long before Draghi published his report. And the idea is to set aside a fund, 410 billion, to finance innovative businesses across Europe. And one of Draghi's key points is that the current budget is too focused on agriculture and cohesion, which is payment to smaller regions. These currently make up 2/3 of the budget, and he said, well, this is not really strategic because the EU should invest more in the future on industrial development, and that's why he suggested the competitiveness pillar, which then became the Competitiveness Fund. Is this enough to meet Europe's challenges? Probably not, because the 400 billion divided by 7 is around 50 billion per year, and that falls short of the amount of investments that is needed in Europe. But definitely, I think from his point of view, it is a significant improvement compared to the current budget.
I mean, and I guess, agricultural funding and cohesion funding are two quite difficult things to change. What are you seeing sort of as the main political fights over this competitiveness fund and the reform of the budget?
I think that with the competitiveness fund, it's supported by the richer countries in Northern Europe and Germany. They stand to gain from this fund because they tend to have more sophisticated and more advanced and more technological firms that can better compete in this fund. And so you have the less developed countries in Eastern Europe who want to attach a geographical balance to the competitiveness fund, where essentially they're saying, there needs to be a share of money that goes to each country, otherwise German firms will gain the lion's share of this fund. But this is unlikely to succeed. And I think that what we're seeing, what we've seen, and what we will continue to see in the budget negotiations is the joining of a coalition that includes a number of member states, the European Parliament, who want to keep the status quo, and they want to keep the new budget as close as possible to the current one. And that's something we've seen repeatedly when they've tried to increase the amount of money that goes to the farmers, when they pushed back against reforms to how the new budget works. So I think that's something we will see in this final year of negotiations with the northern countries that will be pushing for reforms, and other countries will be pushing to keep the new system as close as possible to the status quo, if that is a price to pay to secure their interests.
And I suppose I wanted to just talk a little bit about debt, because I know another sort of tool that Draghi has proposed to expand the amount of money available in Europe is to sort of continue with this joint debt that I guess was started during COVID and is something else we've got to now repay. But is there a sort of softening in the attitude? Because it was quite taboo before, this idea of joint debt.
Yeah, and I mean, the Commission hasn't really delivered on Draghi's recommendations on joint debt, because they have introduced a number of avenues in the new budget through which they can issue joint debt, but this would be debt for loans that have to be repaid by countries. So it's still controversial, but not as controversial as debt for grants, which is free money to a certain extent. And one of the things Draghi said on debt, he hinted to the possibility of rolling over, so deferring the payments of the repayments for the post-COVID debt that was issued in 2021. Obviously, this remains very controversial, and it's something that will have to be discussed in the later stages of the negotiations on the budget.
Okay. Bjarke, maybe I'll bring you in here to talk a little bit about the private money that we're going to get in to boost Europe's competitiveness through the Savings and Investments Union. Now, you've been in Brussels reporting on financial services for a long time, and I know you've seen this before in its previous guise as a Capital Markets Union. Could you tell us a little bit about the big idea here and how it sort of has changed in its latest iteration?
Yeah, you're really aging me by pointing out that I've been here for a long time. I used to have wonderful hair, by the way. To your question. 10 years ago around, Brussels decided that it was about time it had a financial market that could rival Wall Street. Back then, they had London as the financial hub. And so that was all great until Brexit happened. And then this Capital Markets Union, as they called it back then, kind of faltered. Now we're calling it the Savings and Investments Union, as the former Prime Minister of Italy, Letta, has suggested. It's a rebranding exercise. But what they're trying to do this time is they're basically trying to turbocharge the economy, because there are so many governments that are indebted from back-to-back crises. And so you have a lot of Northern Europe which still has money to burn. You have countries in the South that don't. The idea is that if you have big projects that want to make the continent and its economy competitive on the global stage, you need big money to do that. And the idea is that you come up with a financial market that can take startups in Europe, make them big, rival the American tech companies, and also be able to issue a lot of common debt, joint debt, in order to finance those big, ambitious projects.
And I guess one of the sticking points before, which we've discussed, is that member states don't like to give up their powers and their controls here. It's this sort of age-old story of the EU. Are you seeing, obviously there's a renewed political momentum for this at Commission level, certainly. Are you seeing more support from the countries, or how is that sort of splitting out?
I think it really depends. In some ways, it's the same old story. You have smaller countries such as Luxembourg and Ireland that are home to many money managers, big money managers, and they quite like their little setup. And they don't really want to come up with a huge, ambitious supervisory union that would basically cede that supervisory power to a single entity, which is a central point of what Mario Draghi and is it David Letta? It's David, yeah? It's
Enrico Letta.
Yeah, that Letta also suggested that they come up with. Now, because of that resistance, you have this question of, can you bring everyone on board? You have 6 countries, the biggest economies of Europe, so that's France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and Poland, who have clubbed together, and they're trying to inject new momentum into this. But you still have to drag the others along, unless you walk into the controversial world of two-speed Europe, where some people move forward and leave the others behind.
And there have been discussions on that.
There have been, yeah.
And we're quickly running out of time. This is a very brief overview of all the investment, but I mean, there are obviously lots of elements to get into place to make this European financial market happen and encourage people to invest in Europe. What for you are the top 3 sticking points, or the top 3 trickiest subjects that they'll have to overcome?
I mean, trickiest subject. I mean, they're all tricky. That's the problem with sort of rebranding something that didn't work. The idea of coming up with one big markets COP, like they have in the United States with the Securities and Exchange Commission, a European equivalent of that, that's a big ask for 27 countries to get together. You also have to remember that in New York, you have the New York Stock Exchange, right? It's a deep pool of money where companies can go and get money from investors. We have just almost as many stock exchanges in Europe as we do countries. Like, how are you supposed to be able to go to one place and know that a bunch of investors are willing to give you cash in order to scale up? It's just not really there. And then there's the final point of Eurobonds, or joint debt, that we keep coming back to. Especially in this tumultuous world and unpredictable foreign policy coming out of America, a lot of investors are actually looking for alternative places to park their money, not just in the US. And Europe sees an opportunity for this. But in order to attract them over, they have to issue more of these Eurobonds in order to give them a safe place to park their money. And without that, you're not going to be able to attract the same amount of momentum as the US currently enjoys.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're at the end of this very brief interlude into the money, but yeah, I'm sure we'll be continuing it at some other point. Our next panel on European champions is going to be moderated by Politico's senior competition correspondent, Francesca Micheletti. But first, we're going to hear from our partner, Google. After a quick stage change, we'll welcome on stage Karen Massin, Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy of EU institutions at Google. Thank you.